Hey everyone, welcome back. This is part 2 of my Blender Grease Pencil 2D and 3D animated scene tutorial. If you missed part 1, you can find the link in the description below. In this video, we'll do a Grease Pencil overview, draw the 2D scene elements and animate them, and go over camera and exporting options. If you followed along with part 1, this is where our scene currently stands, modeled and shaded. For this part, it's helpful if you have a drawing tablet. However, you can still achieve the same result with a mouse. Just make sure to use the sculpt tool to smooth and adjust things as needed. Feel free to pause or slow down the video if you need more time in each section. I'm first going to do a brief overview on Grease Pencil, but if you're familiar with the tool already, you can skip this and head to step 5, adding Grease Pencil details. To start, let's hide the objects we currently have in our scene. Go up to the outliner and hide them by clicking the eye icon next to them. Now, let's head into the 2D animation workspace. Make sure you're in solid mode, and then hit Shift S to reset our cursor to the world origin. Let's add in a new Grease Pencil object. A Grease Pencil object is actually a 3D object that allows you to draw in 2D space. So right now, I'm going to hit Shift A, go to Grease Pencil, and bring in a monkey. With this in our scene, let's actually go back to our Overlays dropdown up here, and check to see if we have 3D cursor and canvas checked on, and bump up the opacity to around 0.7. If you followed along with part 1, these should already be toggled. This grid is our drawing plane, and we'll learn more about that later. So this looks like a 2D drawing, but because it's a 3D object, we can click G to grab it, R to rotate it, or even S to scale it. We can even tab into edit mode and select certain vertices to move them. Tab back into object mode. The reason we brought this specific monkey in was to see how Grease Pencil layers are set up. In the Object Data Properties tab, this green squiggly icon, we can see we currently have 2 layers, lines and fills. If we hit the eye icon next to them, we know these correspond to those drawn elements respectively. Generally, when drawing in Grease Pencil, we keep this layer set up with our lines on a separate layer and our fills underneath it on another layer. We can also add or delete layers with the plus and minus buttons. Unlike the outliner, these layers are in descending order. Let's say we want to move fills to the top with this arrow, and they'll appear over the lines layer. Let's click on Material Preview mode. Notice how the monkey goes dark? That's because Grease Pencil layers can be affected by light sources. So right underneath the layers window, make sure to uncheck Use Lights for each layer you don't want affected. Click back to solid mode for now. Other options in this panel are blend modes like in Photoshop, opacity, onion skinning for animation, and more. Next, click on the Material Properties tab underneath it, which is the red checkered circle tab. We'll see a list of materials. Here, we have all the materials that make up the monkey drawing. These are specifically Grease Pencil materials and not materials shared with meshes. Like Grease Pencil layers, we can hide certain materials. However, unlike the layers, these are not in any specific order. Notice how some of them have outlines or fills? That's because when we create a new material, under Surface, we can check either Stroke or Fill or both. If we want to add a new material, we click the plus icon to get an empty slot and then select New, which gives us an option to rename the material and add a stroke or fill. Let's delete this for now. Up here, to the blue magic wand, we have visual effects properties. These are specific to Grease Pencil objects, and we have many of them like blur, rim, and shadow. Let's bring in a rim effect. Unfortunately, we can't see this effect in solid mode. If we want to view it, we'll need to be in render preview mode. Now we can see the rim effect. I use these effects a lot in my pieces to give these elements glow and light effects. Let's delete this effect and enter solid mode for now. Right above that, there's the blue wrench modifiers tab. However, these kinds of modifiers are specific to Grease Pencil objects as well. We have modifiers like array to create an array of monkeys, or noise to give it some subtle animation like this. Let's remove the modifiers and make sure our playhead in our timeline is set back to 1. So when we brought this grease pencil object in, we got a new mode to work in called Draw Mode. With the monkey selected, go to the top left drop-down and change it from Object Mode to Draw Mode. This brings up lots of drawing options on the left. This pencil icon is the drawing tool. Let's go up here for a sec. Click this drop-down for all the grease pencil materials in the current object. Select any material that looks outlined and change the drop-down in the center from top to front. Now we can draw a stroke here like this. Let's undo. This paint bucket icon fills things. Pick a material that looks solid and try it. We can also hold down Shift and click drag to define a fill area. This eraser erases lines or fills. This tint tool works with vertex color, which is the other way of coloring in grease pencil. We won't use this in the tutorial, but to demonstrate, let's lock the fill layer by pressing the padlock. Make sure you're in Material Preview mode. Go up to the top, next to Tint, and select any color. Now, try painting over the lines of the monkey. This is similar to a more standard coloring brush tool. Undo and go back to Solid mode and unlock the fill layer. This cutter allows you to select parts of your object and cut them. This eyedropper tool allows you to sample any color and it'll automatically add it as a material in your materials panel. For example, if I eyedrop this, it gets added to the materials list. Lastly, we have various shape options outlined in green below. Let's go back to the draw icon on the top left and select an outline material. To control where we can draw, we can use the drawing panes drop-down here. This grid is our drawing pane, and right now it's set to front view. Let's set it to view. If we draw, the elements are oriented to our view. If we set it to front, this locks the drawing pane how we had it earlier, in the Y facing front like this. If we select side, it locks the pane from the side in the X. And if we select top, it locks the pane from the top in the Z. Moving to the drop-down next to it, we have stroke placement where we can place the canvas. Right now, it's in origin, which is set at the object's origin. Let's Control-Tab to Object Mode and move this monkey back with G and then Y. Then Control-Tab back into Draw Mode. Notice that the canvas has shifted. If we draw in front view, the starting stroke is no longer at the original location we had it, but at the new origin point. Let's change the stroke placement to 3D cursor. The canvas will move to the position of our cursor. Going into a side view, let's shift right-click to move its position again, then draw. An important thing to note is when we go into a side view with our drawing plane selected to front, if we draw outside the plane, it'll still respect the view we were in. However, it'll go by the perpendicular edge of the 3D cursor. These planes are more if you're not in a direct view like this. So play around and see how you can orient your drawings. Down here, we have our timeline. This is if we wanted to start animating. So let's move the timeline to frame 5 and draw something. Notice the previous lines disappear. Move it to 10 and draw. If we restart the playback from 1, we can see it animates through them. Let's actually delete those new frames by selecting the keyframes and hitting X. Note that when you draw anything, be sure you're in the right frame or at the timeline start. If you're creating a static drawing, it should be at the start. Just a few more things. Up here, we have different brushes we can choose from, like ink pen, marker, pencil. We can even import brushes or create some of our own. We'll stick with pencil for now. Again, this dropdown is the list of materials we have available. This adjusts the radius of your brush. You can also hover in the viewport, press F, and size the radius up or down. Here, we can toggle pressure sensitivity, and it's useful if you have a screen tablet to draw on. Strength is opacity. If we put this down to 0.5 and draw, you can tell it's more transparent. You can also hit Shift F to adjust this like brush size. It also has a pressure toggle here. We have more drawing options next to that here. Under Advance, we can make it so that we have smoother lines while drawing. Under Stroke, we have post-processing options, can randomize strokes for variation, or stabilize strokes when drawing. That's like holding down Shift while drawing to enable the pulled string mode. I lightly touched on that in part 1. Now, a few more things. We also have a feature called Guides. Let's move the 3D cursor up here. Toggle Use Guides, which is the grid icon here, and select Circular. See this dot right here? This allows us to create these crisp circles centered at this point. There's also the option to make clean lines. Let's disable it for now. Over here, next to the Modes dropdown, we have this function called Draw Strokes on the back here. Let's change our stroke placement to origin. The canvas goes down to our monkey. Let's select our fill layer in the Layers panel, or for a shortcut, we can hit Y in the viewport and select the layer. With this feature enabled, this allows us to draw a stroke and have it in the back of the previous strokes. Toggle off this feature. Now, let's delete the loose drawings we made except for the monkey. Tab into Edit mode, press 2 for Edge Select, select the loose lines, and start deleting them with X. So, with the overview done, we'll head into the next step. While in the 2D animation workspace, Control-Tab and go into Object mode if you're not already in it. Select the grease pencil object and press X to delete. Then, Shift-S to position the cursor to world origin. Let's unhide our previously hidden objects and go into Render Preview mode. Then, bring in a new grease pencil blank with Shift-A, grease pencil, blank. Let's double check to see if we have the canvas turned on in Overlays and bumped up to 0.7 opacity. Go into the Layers panel down here, this green squiggly icon, and click New. Let's rename this layer to Flower 1 and uncheck Use Lights. In the Material Properties tab, click New and rename the material White Outline. Check Stroke and Fill. Select a stroke color that matches the outline of the meshes. Check Self Overlap and make the fill white. Now let's create another new material named Yellow Outline. Check Stroke with the same outline color, check Self Overlap, and check Fill. Choose a pale yellow. Now go into Draw mode. Make sure the grease pencil object is selected, otherwise you won't see Draw mode. Change the radius to 8 and uncheck Use Pressure. Make sure the drawing plane is set to side. Again, the entire tutorial piece is accidentally oriented to the side view, not the front. And stroke placement is set at 3D cursor. Let's position the 3D cursor here with Shift right click. Remember, when we Shift right click on a mesh, the 3D cursor sticks to the surface of that mesh. Also, make sure that the playback head is set at the beginning at 0. Lastly, go to Advance at the top and bump up Active Smoothing to 0.7. Select the white outline material at the top left. And now we're going to draw some simple flower shapes to fill out the white space between the meshes like this. Because we have self-overlap, we can overlay strokes on top of each other. Once you're good on the shapes, select the yellow outline material from the list and draw circles inside the flowers. Now, bring the 3D cursor to where it's a bit behind the original flowers, here. Select the white outline material from the top left and start drawing the same flowers in the new position, filling up the white space and around the flower. Then select the yellow outline material and add circles within them. Now let's create another flower variation. In the Layers panel, create a new layer and name it Flower 2. Uncheck Use Lights. Now this new flower variation will actually sit behind the previous one, so let's make sure to move the layer underneath Flower 1 in the panel. Let's shift right click behind Flower 1 to position the 3D cursor right here. And in draw mode, let's select the white outline material. Now let's draw these sharp petals coming out from under Flower 1. For this flower, I generally draw petals as a guide for length and placement. Then, draw the other ones around it. Now, we'll do it on the other side. Let's move the cursor by shift right-clicking behind the flowers we just created. Draw more sharp petals coming down the front. With Flower 2 finished, let's move on to the third flower variation. Create a new layer and name it Flower 3. Uncheck Lights. This will actually sit under Flower 1 and Flower 2. Go to the Material Properties tab and create a new material. Let's name it Outline. Check Stroke and make it our default stroke color, and then check Self-Overlap. Go up to the materials and select Outline. We'll be using the same 3D cursor position we just used for the bottom petals here. Hit Y and select Flower 3 to make sure you're on the correct layer. Now let's draw these stems first to gauge how far they'll come out. If it helps, turn off overlays to see better. Then select the yellow outline material and create these triangular shapes along them. Then create circles on the sides of them. Select the outline material and connect those circles to the main stems. Now do them on the other side. With Flower 3 done, it's time for the fourth flower variation. Create a new layer and name it Flower 4. Uncheck Lights. Position it at the bottom of the layers list. Then go to the Material Preferences tab, add a new material slot, and click New to add a new material. Rename this Magenta Outline. Check Stroke and Fill. Change the stroke color to the default outline color and fill color to a light magenta. Now let's position the 3D cursor towards the back, behind this flower here. Go up to the top left and select Outline. Press Y to make sure you're on Flower 4, and draw a line from around the base of the flowers to the top as a guide. Again, disable overlays to help. Then select the magenta outline material and draw petals like this. I'm actually entering the x-axis view to do this, which is again technically our main view in this tutorial. So if you have wobbly lines like me, you can actually go into sculpt mode and use the smooth tool. Just make sure that your plane is still set to side and the other layers are locked when using it, so that you don't accidentally smooth those out. Now I'm using the grab tool in the sculpting options just to help with shaping. Now I'm drawing smaller petals for details. Once you have the petals, switch back to the outline material and draw in more details like this. Let's draw the fifth flower variation. Create a new layer and name it Flower 5. Uncheck Lights and place it at the bottom of the layers list. Add a new material slot, click Add New Material, and rename this Purple Outline. Check Stroke and Fill and Self-Overlap. Change the stroke color to the default color and fill to a bright purple. Turn on overlays and position the 3D cursor right in front of Flower 4. Go to the top left, select the outline material, and hit Y to make sure you're on Flower 5. And let's draw a line from the bottom to the top. Turn off overlays if needed. I'm going to smooth this out by going to Sculpt mode. Just make sure all the other layers are locked. Then select Purple Outline from the Materials dropdown and fill in the petals. We're going to be drawing these round petals in similar fashion to the previous flower. Go into Side View to help. Smooth or grab if you need to with Sculpt. Then add smaller petals. Switch back to the outline material and draw details. I'm now going to make some adjustments and edits with Sculpt. So when I started this, I had the intent to place Flower 5 in front of 4, but now I think it'll look better behind it. Since Flower 5 is already under Flower 4 in the Layers panel, we can tab into Edit mode, select Flower 5, then hit G, then X to move it behind Flower 4 here. Now I want Flower 1, 2, and 3 closer in the X because I want to add leaves right in between here. Make sure overlays are toggled on. With the object selected, tab into Edit mode and lock the Flower 4 and Flower 5 layers. This is so that when we grab the elements from layers Flower 1, 2, or 3, the other layers aren't accidentally affected. Double check to make sure your timeline head is still at 0, and press A to select those strokes. Once selected, hit G and then X to move it until about here. For now, let's lock all the layers and let's add 2 new layers named Leaves Outline and Leaves Fill respectively. Uncheck Use Lights for both. We're going to place these right under the Flower 3 layer in the panel and the outline layer on top. Let's create a new material and rename it Dark Purple. Uncheck Stroke but check Fill. Change this to a dark purple / bluish color. Now, in our viewport, switch over to Draw mode. Hit Y to select Leaves Outline and make it our active layer. Select the outline material at the top and move the 3D cursor to where it sits right behind Flower 3. So, a quick note, I generally draw in Render Preview or Material Preview mode because it helps to see the color on the 3D objects. Solid mode helps as well if you have a more complicated background, but regardless of which view I'm in, if I'm drawing, I sometimes disable the overlays temporarily to help see better like we did before. So now let's draw our leaves here at the bottom. Hide the other layers if helpful. Then let's go into Sculpt mode and make some adjustments. Now let's draw on the left and the right sides. Right now we're just drawing the shapes, no details yet. And again, I'm switching back and forth between sculpting and also locking and hiding the layers that I need to. With our leaves drawn, let's lock the leaves outline layer. All the layers should be locked except leaves fill, and hide all the layers except leaves fill and leaves outline. I'll explain why in a bit. Hovering in the viewport, press Y to make leaves fill your active layer. Pick the paint bucket tool and select the dark purple material so we can fill in these strokes. For this, I'm going to switch over to solid mode to help me see the lines better. Let's start filling. Notice we can fill in wherever we've drawn our lines. The reason we hid the other layers is because if we had, let's say, flower 2 unhidden, and decided to fill this element, it would influence how it's filled, which we don't want. The fill tool takes into consideration all strokes in this object. Let's fill in the other leaves. Whoops, so it looks like I accidentally filled my screen with color. This is because when we tried to fill this leaf, there isn't a stroke or fill defining this specific area. So let's hold down Shift and drag to define an area at the top. Now we can fill in the rest of the leaf. Let's add more details to the leaves. Lock the fill layer and unlock the outline layer. Hit Y, then leaves outline to make it the active layer. Click the draw tool and pick the outline material to draw some details. I'm just drawing more lines on our leaves. Notice how I'm holding down Shift to get a smoother stroke. Let's unhide those layers to take a look. Great, now I want to add a highlight on this leaf to give it some detail. We can do that by using masks. Create a new layer in our Layers panel called Leaves Highlight and place it above Leaves Fill. Uncheck Lights. Check Masks and add Leaves Fill to the list here. Let's create a new material. Name this Highlight. Let's pick a lighter purple for the stroke and leave fill unchecked. Now let's draw near the bottom edges of the leaves to give it some detail. Again, if you'd like to adjust your radius, hit F and size it up that way. Also, if you have a pen tablet, it might be helpful to turn on pressure sensitivity near the radius for this. Just make sure after you're done, you turn it off and return the radius to 8. If the highlight's looking a little too bright, take down the opacity in the Layers panel. I put mine to about 0.3. If you'd like, you can play around with blend modes right above it. The Add Blend mode might work for this. So now I'm thinking of how to balance the bouquet, and I want to put leaves at the top here. Let's hide and lock our layers as needed. But an easy way to do that is to click this button, Isolate Layer. You may have seen me use it earlier, but it hides and locks all the layers that aren't active. The one underneath locks inactive layers but doesn't hide them. I like adding these both to my quick favorites to speed up workflow. Let's right-click the button of the first icon and select Add to Quick Favorites. Then do the same for the padlock. We won't be doing this, but another tip you can do is to actually add the padlock and eye icon of a layer to your quick favorites. This is really helpful when you're working on larger pieces. Unfortunately, the quick favorite won't apply to the active layer you're on. For example, if my active layer is flower 2, and I added the hide icon from Leaves Outline to my quick favorites, when I access it in my viewport with Q, it hides the leaves layer, but not flower 2. I'm going to remove this from my quick favorites. Going back to quick favorites with Q in the viewport, we have the isolate layer options here. Again, the first isolate layer hides and locks inactive layers. The second isolate layer just locks inactive layers. You can see this more clearly in the Layers panel. With overlays turned on, let's find a new position for the 3D cursor to create those leaves at the top. Right here in front of flower 4 and 5 works. So now toggle off overlays, Press Y to make sure your active layer is Leaves Outline, and lock all inactive layers by pressing Q and clicking the second Isolate Layer option. Again, these correspond to the buttons at the bottom right of the Layers panel. If you need to double check if everything looks good, you can look at the layers list. With our options in check and the outline material selected, let's start drawing. I'm actually going to enter solid mode for this. So again, I'm just switching between the sculpt and draw modes to smooth and edit as I go. So now, with Y, select our Leaves Fill layer, and then Q to select the first Isolate Layer option. You might need to access it twice until you get it isolated the way you want. However, unhide the outline layer so we can see what we're filling. With the Fill tool selected, pick the dark purple material, and let's start filling it. We have this rose head in the way, so we can hide that in the outliner for now. Once filled, let's add details to this leaf. Select Leaves Outline and unlock it while locking the fill layer, and select the outline material from the top left. Now, click on the Draw tool here, or if you want to know the shortcut, it's Shift plus Spacebar and then the corresponding number next to the icon. In this case, Draw is 1. With the Drawing tool selected, we're going to draw some lines of detail. Now that we've drawn the leaves details, let's draw in the highlights. Lock Leaves Outline and unhide and unlock Leaves Highlight. Pick the highlight material from the top and adjust the radius of your brush. Turn on pressure sensitivity if needed. Let's unhide all the layers, toggle back overlays, enter render preview mode, and go back to object mode. I kind of want to duplicate this element from flower 3 here to fill this part up. With the grease pencil object selected, tab into edit mode and make sure all the layers are locked except flower 3. Grab the strokes on the bottom right, Shift D to duplicate, then Z to bring it up, and then hit R, Z, type 180 and then press enter to flip it. Then RX to rotate it like this. Then GY to shift it to the left, and then GX to move it back. Toggle off overlays if needed. Once you're done, toggle it back on and then tab into object mode. Let's create a new layer called Flower 6 and put it at the top of the layers list. Uncheck lights. We're going to draw some flowers coming off of the vase. Let's create a new material and name it Green Outline. Check Stroke and Self Overlap. Select the default stroke color and check Fill and select a pale greenish yellow color. Shift right click to place our 3D cursor right here. These elements will kind of sit in front of the flowers. With the object selected, go into draw mode. Press Y to check you're on the right layer and Q, second option, to lock any inactive layers and then draw the flower. Again, turn off overlays if needed. I'm going to draw flowers in 2 more locations. You can use the table mesh to help place the 3D cursor. Again, I'm switching between sculpting and drawing to create this. And now we have our green flowers in place. Let's start animating this object. We're going to keep it simple for this piece. Head into object mode. With the grease pencil object selected, notice the timeline down below. Here we can animate the layers. At the bottom here, we have some playback controls, and at the bottom right, we have the start and end frames. This corresponds to our output properties that we'll go over later. We're going to change 250 to 260 for now, with our frame rate being 24 frames per second. So now we're going to start with animating those green flowers we just brought in. Tab into edit mode and make sure you're in solid mode with overlays turned on. Make sure all the layers except flower 6 are locked. I want these flowers to rotate along the x-axis. So select a flower, move the playhead frame to 5, and in the viewport, press R and then X. Notice when we shift the playhead, it moves. Something we should turn on while animating are onion skins. Onion skins help us see the animation before and after the current frame. These cannot be viewed in render preview mode. Go up to the overlays dropdown and make sure onion skin is checked. Now go to the layers panel and make sure that the onion skin icon here is toggled on for that layer. Going back to the timeline, let's go to frame 10. Now, when you try to rotate, you'll see the before animation underneath. Let's delete these keyframes. For this, I'm going to animate every 5 frames. So move the playhead to 10 and rotate the lines with R, then X, and choose how far you want it to rotate. Then click. Now, in between the 2 frames, I'm going to animate a frame to make a smoother transition, like this. Another way you can do this is with interpolation here at the top. However, I'm just going to animate manually for now. I want to duplicate the first and second frames to create a repeating action. Select the first frame by hitting Shift D to duplicate and put it at frame 20. Then do the same with the second at frame 15. So now we have a repeating action. I want to animate the other green flowers here. Let's actually delete the last 2 keyframes so we can animate the other flowers in this layer. Now, with all of them animated, duplicate the last 2 again like we did before. So the first frame at frame 20 and the second frame at frame 15. Now, when we play it back, they all animate. If you'd like to add more frames in between or use interpolation, feel free to do so. So the animation only lasts from frame 0 to frame 20. How do we get it to repeat for the entire duration of our scene? We can easily do that with a modifier. Going to this tab, add a time offset modifier. Click Keep Loop and define a custom range of 0 to 20. Now, when we go into object mode, you'll notice that it repeats. This influence tab is really helpful as well. It specifies what layer the modifier affects. So let's say when we animated another layer, it was actually 30 frames long instead of 20. We could specify the influence to flower 1 and change the range from 0 to 30 instead. However, for this tutorial, we're going to keep it all animated by 20 for the entire project to keep it simple. Going back to our timeline, we have flower 6 done and animated, so let's lock this. Flower 1, we won't animate, so we can keep it locked. But for flower 2, we'll want to move these elements in and out. So let's unlock the layer, toggle onion skin in the layers panel, and disable it for flower 6. Tab into edit mode, and select the flowers on the left. Go up to frame 10. Now, I don't want to move this in the X, just the Y and the Z, so I'm going to hit G, then Shift X, and move it around to here. Then I'll do the same for the other side and for the middle. Now I'll create my in-between layer at frame 5. Use your onion skin layers as a guide. Now duplicate the first 2 frames and put them at the end to repeat the animation. Head into object mode to view it. Now we'll move on to flower 3. Lock flower 2 and unlock flower 3. We're going to do a slight rotation on these. Toggle its onion skin and disable it on flower 2. Tab into edit mode. Select the flower here and move to frame 10. Again, rotating along the X, so R and then X. Same thing for the other side and the center. Now create the in-betweens at frame 5. Duplicate the first 2 frames to repeat the animation, and then go back into object mode. So now we're making good progress. Let's lock flower 3, skip the leaves for now, and go to flower 4. I want this to move up and down. Unlock it, toggle onion skin, and disable it from the previous layer. Tab into edit mode. Select with A, and move the playhead to 10. Again, G, then Shift X, and bring it up. Then create the in-between. Then duplicate those frames to repeat the animation. Now lock flower 4 and repeat the process for flower 5, except I want it to move it down first. Great, now we have our flower layers animated. We're going to move on to our leaves. Earlier, when we drew the 2 leaf layers, we purposely split them up. If you were going to traditionally animate, you would draw the outlines first, and then fill those in by frame. Also, having the outlines on a separate layer would make it easier to change our stroke color. For this, we're going to instead use the Sculpt tool to animate. Make sure that all the layers are locked except the leaf layers, and turn on onion skin for those 3 and disable it on the previous layer. Now, go into Sculpt mode from the Modes dropdown. This sculpt mode is different from the default sculpt mode as it's specific to Grease Pencil. So here we have a couple of great options like smoothing, which we used earlier. For this, we'll be using grab. Make sure the drawing plane at the top here is set to side. Go up to frame 10 and pull these shapes out like this. If you need to increase the area of effect, you can hit F and increase it that way. We just want to pull them out just a bit. Then let's create the in-between. Then duplicate these 2 to finish the repeating action. So now we have all our elements moving. Going back to flower 1, we decided not to animate this layer. This is because we'll be adding a noise modifier on this object to give it some randomized movement. In object mode, head to the modifiers tab, which is the blue wrench, and add a noise modifier. Make sure randomize is checked. When we play this back, this object looks crazy. We're going to take down the position parameter to 0.01, and now the animation is subtle. Now we're finished with animating that Grease Pencil object. In the outliner, let's rename this Flower Details. I now want to create some loose design elements. Shift right-click on the table here and create a new Grease Pencil blank. Let's rename it Flower Element. Go to the Materials tab and add 2 new slots. Bring in the purple outline and the yellow outline materials. Create a new layer and name it Flower. Uncheck Use Lights. Now in Draw mode, with the purple material selected, draw a circle. Toggle off overlays if needed. Use this as a guide to draw petals around it. Notice I'm in the X-axis view and rotating the canvas with Shift 4 or Shift 6. Now switch the material to yellow outline and create a circle in the middle. I'm just switching between Sculpt and Edit. Now, down at the timeline, our drawing is at the wrong frame. Let's move this over to 0. Switch to Edit mode. Turn on onion skin and make sure you have overlays toggled and you're again in solid or material preview mode so the skins show up. Select the drawing. Move the playhead to 10 and we're going to try and spin this. Let's rotate it in the X 180 degrees. Then create the other keyframes at 5 and 15. Duplicate the 0 frame and place it at 20. Now it animates in a full circle. To get this to repeat, we need a modifier. Tap into Object mode, Select this flower element and the flower details grease pencil object. Hit Ctrl L and copy the modifiers. Now it repeats. The reason we made these in a separate grease pencil object is because we're going to animate this object in 3D as well, not only as a grease pencil layer. So right-click the object and select Set Origin to Geometry. Now I'll move it here. Then duplicate it and place another one down here. Also, it's kind of weird that they all uniformly repeat, so select each one and under the Time Offset modifier, choose different values for the frame offset parameter. So now we're going to animate these objects in 3D. Let's head over to the animation workspace here. So we have a timeline here and two viewports. In object mode, let's select this flower here. Press I to keyframe, and you can pick from the list what to keyframe. We'll pick location, rotation, and scale for now. Move up to around frame 30, G, then Z to bring it up. Then hit I to keyframe lock rot and scale. Then duplicate frame 0 and put it at 65. So now we have some floating flower. To repeat this action, go up to the top left and change this window to Graph Editor. Expand the Object Transformation dropdown, select Z location, hit N, select Modifier, and add a Cycles modifier. Now, when you play back, it repeats the action you just animated. Let's change this window back to the timeline in the top left. Let's do this for the other object. Select this flower. I want this flower to go down instead of up this time. At 0, hit I to keyframe lock rot scale and move the playhead to around frame 30. Then move the object down. Then press I to keyframe lock rot scale. Duplicate frame 0 and move it to 65. Then go into the Graph Editor, expand the Object Transformation, select Z location, select Modifier, and add a Cycles modifier to repeat. Great, now we have those elements animated. Let's move on to effects and adjustments. The next thing I want to do is add some design elements and light glow effects to this. Let's start with the design details. Switch to the 2D animation workspace. Then shift right-click around here to place the 3D cursor. Let's create a new grease pencil blank with Shift A, grease pencil, then blank. Rename this Design Details. Add a new material and name it White Outliner. Check Stroke and change it to white. Create a new layer and uncheck Use Lights. Name this Details. Going into draw mode, make sure the playhead is at 0, the stroke placement is at the 3D cursor, and drawing plane is still set to side. And now we're ready to draw. Let's enter the x-axis view for this. So here, I want to create random dots and circles. So let's start with the dots. With the draw tool selected, let's adjust the radius by pressing F and start placing these dots in our scene. Toggle off overlays if needed. Now we'll draw some circles. Bring the radius down to 8. Instead of the draw tool, it might be easier to use the circle tool here. Using it, let's click drag while holding shift, then press enter. Now that we have these elements, let's push them back on the X in various positions. Tab into edit mode and select individual elements to do this. Notice how right here, there's some glitching going on. It might be because there's another grease pencil object in proximity. To avoid this, I generally keep distance between grease pencil objects, or merge grease pencil objects together, which I'll demonstrate later. Now it's time to add the glow effect. Go into object mode and make sure you're in render preview mode, otherwise you can't see these effects. Go to this magic wand tool, which is the Visual Effects Properties tab, and select Glow. Bump the samples to 12 and select Glow Under. Adjust the size and opacity as needed. I'm going to make it around 20 on the X and Y, opacity to 0.7, and color a pale yellow. Also, let's add a noise modifier with 0.02 in position to give it some randomness. Just a side note, if you'd like to make these dots bigger, go into Edit mode, select one, and scale it with Alt-S instead of just S, since it's a vertex. Next, we're going to create light trails. Position the 3D cursor at the front of the table and create a new grease pencil blank. Rename this Light Trails. Create a new material called Yellow Outliner. Click Stroke and enter a light pale yellow color and leave Fill unchecked. Create a new layer and uncheck Use Lights. Name this Light Trail. Now, in Draw mode, select the Line tool and change the radius to 40. Draw a diagonal line from the top right to the bottom left like this. Then change the mode to Sculpt mode and select Thickness. Click this minus button at the top here to switch the effect from growth to tapering. Taper the ends of this stroke. Go to the Visual Effects properties and select Blur from the dropdown. Change the sizes of X and Y to 100 and samples to 12. Go to the Layer panel and change the opacity to 0.25. If we switch to Object mode and View and Render Preview mode, we'll see our light trail. Let's duplicate this 2 more times and position it within our scene. The next thing I want to do is go back to Flower Details and add a rim effect. Go to the Visual Effects Properties tab and let's add rim. Change the X to 25 and the Y to 10. I'm also going to take some time to adjust the colors here as well. Let's add the rim effect to the 2 loose purple flowers as well. These actually had different options. I changed X to 20 and Y to 15. The last few things we'll need to do is draw some background elements. Shift right click here and add a new grease pencil blank. Bring in the outline material and create 2 new layers. Name them Foreground Details and Background Details, and uncheck Use Lights for both. Now, we're actually going to draw on the surface of these 3D elements to give them some detail. To do that, in Draw mode, change the stroke placement from 3D cursor to surface, and set offset to 0. Then change the radius to 12 to 14 pixels. Hit Y to make sure the active layer is on Foreground Details, your playhead is at 0, and we're on the Draw tool. Let's add details on the table. Again, toggle off overlays if needed. Then the vases, and now the window. Now bring in a new material. Name this Dark Fill. Uncheck Stroke but enable Fill and make it the same color as the outline color. While in Draw mode, change stroke placement back to 3D cursor. With Shift right click, let's place the 3D cursor behind the window like this. Then, with Dark Fill selected from the top, the active layer set to Background Details, and with the Fill tool, let's draw a defined area. Then, draw some leaf silhouettes coming out from it. Now, switch to the outline material and draw some leaves coming up. Feel free to draw other details as needed. I ended up drawing more details in the Flower Details grease pencil object and doing more animations. So now we have our final piece created and animated. We'll move on to camera and exporting options next. So switch into the animation workspace. We're going to be using our default camera for this. I generally like keeping this left viewport the camera view so I can adjust the position of the camera in the right view. So go into the camera view on the left. Again, the shortcut is numpad 0. If you'd like to change the resolution of the camera, you can head to Output Properties and change the X and Y values there. But I'm going to leave it at 1920 by 1080 for now, for widescreen. But if you'd like to make it square, you can make it 1080 by 1080. Now, in the right viewport, let's point our camera to our objects and hit Ctrl-Alt numpad 0. Let's rotate and position the camera to our liking. Now, with our camera selected, hit N and go to View. Check Camera to View. This makes your current view applicable to your camera's view. Once we're happy with this position, we'll keyframe this to animate it. To do that, hit I and keyframe it at 0. Then, head up to 130 and move the camera closer. Press I to keyframe, and then duplicate the frames at 0 and then move it to 260. Now the view repeats. The reason we made our animation about 260 in length was because our animations repeat every 20 frames or are in ratio to it. Now, you might run into this issue where it looks like our grease pencil layers disappear. This also shows up in the camera. I think it has to do with separate grease pencil objects being in proximity to one another. To fix this, I selected the background elements and flower detail grease pencil objects and merged them with Ctrl-J. Then, I put the new layers at the bottom in my layers panel. If you do this, I would suggest only merging grease pencil objects with the same object transforms, visual effects properties, and modifiers. When we're happy with our camera view and adjustments, we can now export. Moving to the Render Properties tab, we'll be using Eevee for this. We won't really need to touch anything here. Going to Output Properties, let's specify an output location and name. Then, for file format, we can export an image or export a video. In this case, we'd like to do a video. From the options, click on FFmpeg Video. Under Encoding, select the MPEG-4 container. Down in Video, keep it H.264, and for output quality, I generally pick perceptually lossless for videos, but you can decide. Then, once you have those options, you can head up to the Render tab and select Render Animation. It'll take some time depending on your computer, but once you're done, you'll have your completed animation here. This is the end of the tutorial. Thanks so much to all those who watched and participated. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and leave a comment. There's still a lot more about Grease Pencil I didn't cover in this tutorial, and it's a tool that is rapidly evolving, but I hope this is helpful in getting started with it. If you do end up creating this and want to share your creations, tag me on Instagram at kevandram. And if you enjoyed this, please like, share, or subscribe for more videos. My channel is all about trying to become a better creative. I like working with various creative mediums and technology to experiment and show the creation process. Thanks again, and see you next time.